Hello, everybody. Today is October 18th, Wednesday. Sorry about that. Wednesday, October 18th, here in the United States. We are looking at a big show today, all sorts of stuff to cover. We are going to eventually get into the latest updates, unfortunately, going on in Israel at the moment. And you've obviously got President Biden on the ground there. More lives lost, unfortunately. The situation really does not seem to be improving there. We also are going to have an update on the United Auto Workers strike. GM pushing back an investor day. It seems like the strike is potentially going to be having an impact on their bottom line at this point. But first, before we get into any of that, we do have a special guest joining us today. We're going to be speaking with him. I teased this a little bit yesterday. The Unity Council from East Palestine had been in communications with Stephen Lester from the Center for Health and Environmental Justice. He's the science director there, and he has been really sounding the alarm on the issue of dioxins, which is a toxic chemical in East Palestine, Ohio, that has been found in some quantities, but really hasn't been looked into nearly enough as a result of that train derailment back in February. So we're going to jump right into that in just a second. But first, for those of you just joining us right now, please smash the like button to help get this video out to more folks. It helps quite a bit. And frankly, not enough folks are talking about the ongoing effects of what has been going on in East Palestine since this derailment. So many folks in that community still really haven't been made whole, even if there is a way to do that at this point in time. Before we bring Stephen Lester in here, though, I'd like to play just a quick clip from the first time we met, actually, way back in February on Status Coup's first on-the-ground reporting trip in East Palestine. Colin, we can go ahead and play that clip.
Dioxins, this category, there's like 75 of these dioxins. One of them is the most toxic chemical ever tested in the United States.
And so dioxin is an extraordinarily toxic substance. It causes cancer, reproductive problems, developmental problems, immune system problems, diabetes. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So, but these are all subtle effects that will affect people over the life of their lives.
Again, I am happy to be joined today by Stephen Lester, Science Director from the Center for Health and Environmental Justice. Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I guess, high level of this for folks who maybe, haven't been into the weeds on this as much as you have, or I have, or some other folks have on this. Do you mind just giving a rough overview of what are dioxins and how did they end up in East Palestine?
Sure, happy to do that. Dioxin is a chemical, but it's also a class and a group of some 75 related compounds that have similar activity in terms of their toxicity. And the most toxic one or version of it is the chemical that was found in Agent Orange. A lot of people may be familiar with that. And its short acronym, if you will, is TCDD. But it's a highly potent, very toxic chemical. It's one of the most potent chemicals ever tested in the United States. And it's not a product that you make for a purpose. It's a byproduct of various processing, particularly plastic processing involving vinyl chloride. And the other way you get it is from burning products and chemicals. And so in this case, when they burned the vinyl chloride on the train that was derailed, it generated and created dioxin in the air emissions in the smoke that people saw. That black smoke, the particulate smoke, included dioxin as a byproduct. So it was spread throughout the community as a result of that burning.
Absolutely. And, that clip that we just played was from a meeting back in February put on by River Valley Organizing. And, during that time frame, there was obviously so much information swirling around. And that meeting in particular with the residents that I was speaking to, for them, a lot of them, it was the first time kind of hearing about dioxin. So this was an alarming meeting. Folks had a lot of questions. And really all those questions ended up really putting pressure eventually on the EPA to do some limited dioxin testing, at least. you recently sent a letter and had been in communications with the Unity Council in East Palestine, Ohio. It seems like you still have a lot of concerns over dioxins in the community. Dioxin is known to cause all sorts of health effects. I guess first off, do you mind just talking about the risks to folks who may be exposed to these dioxins, and then just get into what your issue is at this point with the testing that's gone on so far?
Sure. In terms of the risks from dioxin, there's a range of different health effects that can result from dioxin exposure. The most obvious is cancer, but it also affects the immune system, reproductive system, the central nervous system. It can cause diabetes, and so it affects hormone function in the body. I mean, it's a very diverse acting chemical in the fact that it affects so many different parts of the body, and that's pretty unusual. Most chemicals, you end up with 2 or 3 primary targets in the body, but with dioxin, it's probably 10 or so. I mean, it's really different. And it doesn't take very much dioxin to cause adverse health effects. But the problem with dioxin exposure is that so many of these chemicals, so much of these adverse effects can be caused and brought on by other things as well. And so like central nervous system headaches or things like that can be caused by a variety of different things. And so you can't pin it on dioxin. Reproductive outcomes, again, a variety of different things can happen. So it's hard. There's no fingerprint, if you will, that can tag or relate a chemical exposure, a specific chemical exposure like dioxin, to a specific health outcome. So it's all very difficult to interpret at the end of the day. And that's what people are seeing. I mean, EPA has their view of the world, and they're saying everything is fine, and yet people know it's not because they're having all these adverse effects and symptoms. Problems are still going. So there's a real disconnect between what the narrative, if you will, coming out of EPA and the community, and that's a problem.
Right, absolutely. And in your letter, you mentioned too, I mean, the testing protocols for dioxin and for many other chemicals of concern, I'll add, in your expertise, it sounds like they weren't doing testing essentially with adverse health effects in mind. They were just doing testing with other benchmarks that may be more arbitrary. Do you mind explaining that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. The fundamental conclusion that we looked at all the EPA's data around the dioxin testing. They've done some 260 or odd tests they got in the soil throughout the neighborhood there. But but all of that testing really fails to answer the questions people have been asking from day one. And the reason it fails is because the sampling plan, was not designed to address public health risks. It was simply designed, and this is the quote in the sampling plan from the contractor that was approved by EPA for Norfolk Southern. They simply said they were going to inspect the soil. It was a soil inspection report. I don't know what that possibly can mean in this context. And then the EPA did something very unusual, is that there are sort of standard ways for investigating contamination in any place, whether it's a community or an industrial site or whatever it might be. And they allowed the company in this case to make decisions on where to collect samples based on visual inspection, walking around the site and saying, okay, let's sample here, but not there.
Right.
And the thought is that, okay, they were going to look for places of obvious evidence of contamination, residual ash that might have fallen from the fire or something. I don't know. But that is very unorthodox, very out of the ordinary. Nobody does this. And I've been doing this for over 40 years, and I've never seen EPA approve a site inspection or testing plan that would allow the contractor responsible for the problem to just walk a site and visually decide where to take samples from.
Right.
So it's not consistent with standard procedures. And as a result, you have this data that EPA claims doesn't show very much, but yet part of the reason may be a reflection of the sampling approach and the purpose of the sampling, and not because it's really not there.
Right. And that bears out too when you look at, whether it's specifically on dioxin testing or just other testing in the area. We've had universities such as Purdue University, Dr. Andrew Welton's done a lot of testing in the area. You've got other independent testers, Scott Smith. There's several folks I'll try to keep it high level for folks who might not be as into the weeds. Several other testing organizations have tested in the area. And sure, here and there, sometimes their test results will line up with the EPA's, but other times they're not even close in some cases. And you've got to wonder what is going on when that is the case here. And for folks just joining us right now, please smash the like button to help get this out to more folks. This is Stephen Lester, the science director with the, I've got it right in front of me here. Sorry about that. Science director with the Center for Health and Environmental Justice. We're speaking about a report that has recently come out from him, updating everybody on the dioxin testing in East Palestine, Ohio, the health concerns going on there. So obviously, again, back in February, when we played that clip earlier on when we first met, we knew quite a bit about this. We didn't know nearly as much about this issue as we do now. Now having the 8 months of information, everything that has gone on at this point, do you think, in your view, are you more concerned about the risk of dioxin in this area? Is your view it's about the same? Given the information we've gotten since then, how dangerous potentially is this situation going on here?
Well, I think the sad part is that I don't think that we know much more than we did in February about what's in the area. I mean, you can't tell, for example, where dioxin is and where it isn't because of these results. You can't tell whether a specific area has a certain concentration of dioxin. And that the reason for that is because they've not released any information on where the sample were taken from. So nobody can look at the results and say, okay, and there were some high samples that were found. And why, for example, the highest sample was 510 parts per trillion, which is half the level that they used to evacuate the town in Times Beach, Missouri. So it's a significant level. Where is that sample? Why is it so high? EPA should be following up with that and looking at, is it a hotspot? Is there a unique reason why it's so high? I mean, what's the story with that? And so they're not doing any of that. They're not doing any follow-up testing. And I think the one thing that where we stand today is that EPA needs to go back and do more testing that's more transparent and clear, and that scientists that the community of points should be working with the EPA to identify where to test with a public health focus to try to figure out so that we can learn about what the risks are that people are facing. And you can learn something about that if you have data that's taken in places where people are, not if it's added where somebody walking a site thought was a good idea. I mean, that's so unprofessional and so unorthodox that it's just very frustrating that EPA would do something like that in a situation as high profile as this. It's really very surprising.
Absolutely. And I mean, the public trust with the EPA and the East Palestine community is just, I mean, if they did a poll on it, it would be rough. It would be very rough for the EPA. And frankly, they know it. Like they should know that at this point. I mean, when you've got some of these EPA officials in the area, the amount of folks, being a journalist, the amount of folks who are sending me recorded conversations with the EPA and all this sort of stuff. These people didn't start this instance by recording conversations with officials. They genuinely trusted them until they were all given reasons not to trust them. It breaks my heart in some cases. I'll mention one resident in particular. Her name's Shelby Walker. She lives about 900 feet from where they detonated the 5 cars of vinyl chloride. She could not get the EPA to do a soil test in her yard. In my opinion, that's unacceptable.
No, it's not. It makes no sense. And the other thing is that EPA has not released any data and done any testing that they've released publicly on the site of the burn. I mean, that's ground zero. There should be data and information on what the dioxin levels were in that area, in part because that area is the part that's still being cleaned up. So that's being just redistributed into the community now, and to this day, and has been for the last 8 months. So there's a lot to be said about what EPA has not done here. And they've not done the kind of testing that provides information that people can use to make decisions about their health. It's not information that can be used to evaluate public health risks. And it's not information that's helpful to people. And so for them to not do testing like for that lady who lives right on top of the site doesn't make any sense at all. One has to wonder, what is EPA's real purpose here? It's not to protect public health. I mean, their mission says that on their website, that their mission is to protect public health. Well, that's not what they're doing here. And I don't know what they're doing. And it's really a shame. And the people in East Palestine are being victimized again by EPA's behavior here.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, another element to this too, I'm curious your thoughts. So we saw, it was a couple of weeks ago at this point now, folks have been begging for some sort of legislation or somebody to step up and do something. To date, I'll note that there hasn't even been like a railroad safety bill or anything passed through the federal government at this point, which is unacceptable in my opinion. But folks in East Palestine have been asking for some sort of help. Just a couple weeks ago, they finally got an executive order from the Biden administration. It's pretty loosey-goosey. I went into detail in another video, folks. You can go check it out on the channel here if you're interested to get the details. But at this point, FEMA now does have a coordinator on site. In your experience with other disasters potentially like this, do you think that's going to move the needle at all? Or do you think that this FEMA person is going to end up relying heavily on what the EPA is saying and other federal agencies?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's going to do much at all, frankly. Disappointing the way that federal government has responded to this, in the White House in particular. There's a lot of unanswered questions here. And, I got involved in this work first at Love Canal in Niagara Falls, New York. And the questions people were asking then are very similar to what people are asking today. They want to know whether their health has been affected by their exposure. And one thing that's very hard for me as a scientist to accept, that 40 years ago at Love Canal, we couldn't answer those questions for people. And today, as scientists, we still can't answer those questions. So people who are exposed to mixtures of chemicals like occurred in this situation, there's no guidelines. There's no science that really says what's going to happen to these folks. And so in the absence of that knowledge, I went to a public health school, and one of the first things they taught us in public health school, in the absence of knowing, protect people's health. And that's what government should be doing here. They should be protecting the people's health here. And if that means relocating and moving everybody from this area who wants to move, that's what they should do. It can't be a matter of money, because there's a responsible party here that we all know who's responsible for what happened. There's no question on that. So, where the science can't answer the questions, where there's all this uncertainty about what to do, and EPA has done nothing but adds uncertainty with all their testing. They've not answered any questions. So with all the uncertainty, what should happen, in my opinion now, is that the government should step in and relocate the people who need to be relocated and recover the costs from the responsible party.
Yeah, and again, I couldn't agree more. The cost of doing that is also negligible for the federal government, for Norfolk Southern. Norfolk Southern's $1 billion company. I did the math a while back, and obviously I'm not suggesting that this is what needs to happen, but I did the math. The median home price in East Palestine is a little over $100,000. I'm forgetting the specific number of homes that there were, but it ended up being somewhere around between $250 and $300 million if you were to buy everybody's home at the value that it was back in January before this happened. $300 million is a drop in the bucket for a Norfolk Southern, for the federal government, whoever it may be. I honestly don't care who pays for it, as long as these folks are taken care of, because so many people that I talk to want to leave, but they're on a tight financial situation. A lot of folks in East Palestine don't make a whole lot of money, unfortunately. The median income for an individual in the community is roughly $28,000 a year. These folks don't have the money to essentially go put down a mortgage on another home. If they rent, they're basically, living paycheck to paycheck, paying their rent in a lot of cases. They don't have the means to be able to pick up and leave without that additional assistance. And that assistance, like you said, is still not happening at this time, which is,
and people shouldn't have to put their own money out to get a new mortgage, or they shouldn't have to pay their own hotel costs even and then get reimbursed. This are the kinds of hardships that just compound a problem in a place like this, in a situation like this. It really, the Norfolk Southern really should be stepping up and doing the right thing here by these people, with the acknowledgement that the science can't answer the fundamental questions that people are asking about the risks and about the health effects. So in that situation, there's really no other alternative but for the company to step in and do the right thing. And the government needs to do that as well. And I think it's if EPA wanted to do good science, they had that opportunity. They failed. They haven't done that. They've just done testing that is not helpful to anybody and raises more questions than it provides answers. So that window, that time is really gone. Now they need to step in and do what's right for the community and for the people who still live there and are still suffering from their chemical exposure. And there's a whole lot of questions about that some of the scientists on that roundtable on Monday were trying to look into. But trying to gather a few pennies here and there to do some testing is going to be helpful, but it's not going to answer the big picture questions. And at Love Canal 40 years ago, there was 900 families, 4,000 people, a very similar population to what is in East Palestine. And these studies weren't done there either. And, so we've not been able to recognize the hardships and the difficulties people go through in these communities. And we haven't been able to answer the science questions. So the best thing left to do is to take care of the people.
Absolutely.
It's the public health thing that I learned in school when I was a kid is that, you act to protect people in the absence of clarity and knowledge. And so when we don't have that here. So it's the right thing to do. EPA should do it. Norfolk Southern should do it. The White House should do it. There's a lot of people who can step in and take care of this, and it's time for that to happen.
Absolutely. Stephen, Lester, thank you so much for taking the time to join us to kind of give an update here. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, and I wish people in East Palestine the best.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Again, that was Stephen Lester for the science director for the Center for Health and Environmental Justice, giving an update on the testing in East Palestine. Stephen Lester, again, we met initially on the ground back in February on our first of what's turned into about a month of on the ground reporting in East Palestine, over 4 trips this whole time. For those of you watching right now, please smash the like button to help get this out to more folks. We could really get this out here. There we go. Smash the like button. Also, if you're seeing us for the first time right now and you haven't seen some of our East Palestine coverage, please hit the subscribe button down below. You can check out, I think it's hundreds of videos on East Palestine at this point with interviews with residents and the like. We're going to switch from East Palestine to across the ocean to what is going on in Israel and Palestine in just a second here. We're also going to cover the latest on the UAW strike. We wanted to chat with Stephen Lester first because he was only available right at 5 o'clock there. Now we are going to get into, again, the Israel-Palestine conflict that is still going on. We've got President Biden literally in Israel as I'm talking right now. I believe he's still there. He was there this morning, and the UAW strike. But if you can support our on-the-ground reporting so that we can continue to shed light on stories like East Palestine, again, the only way to do that is by becoming a member to support our independent on-the-ground reporting. StatusCoup.com/join is the place to do that. It makes a huge, huge difference. So moving on here to what is going on in Israel. We spent a good chunk of the show yesterday talking about this, highlighting President Biden's trip that went on this morning. We're going to play a couple of clips here. First, from the meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden. We'll start off with the comments from Netanyahu, essentially comparing what has gone on so far in Israel to 9/11 and making some comparisons to Hamas. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what Netanyahu said in his meeting with President Biden this morning.
On October 7th, Hamas murdered 1,400 Israelis, maybe more. This is in a country of fewer than 10 million people. This would be equivalent to over 50,000 Americans murdered in a single day. That's 29 11s. That is why October 7th is another day that will live in infamy. Mr. President, you rightly said that Hamas is worse than ISIS. The German chancellor who visited here yesterday said that Hamas were the new Nazis. You're both right. And just as the civilized world united to defeat the Nazis and united to defeat ISIS, the civilized world must unite to defeat Hamas. I can assure you, Mr. President, Israel is united to defeat Hamas. and we will defeat Hamas and remove this terrible threat from our lives. The forces of civilization will prevail for our sake, for your sake, for peace and security in our region and in the world. Mr. President, for the people of Israel, there's only one thing better than having a true friend like you standing with Israel, and that is having you standing in Israel. Your visit here is the first visit of an American president in Israel at a time of war. It is deeply, deeply moving.
So there you heard Netanyahu comparing this event going on to 9/11 using, population comparisons in a percentage basis. Obviously, comparing it to 9/11, kind of setting things up that you can have a response that is equal to something like the United States did after 9/11. Obviously, some sort of response is absolutely warranted, but and this is a whole laundry list of things that I could go into. I'm going to cut it short on this. There's no question that the United States involvement after 9/11 was majorly overstepped. We got into way too much conflict. There was way more lives lost, and unneeded lives lost. So making those comparisons is definitely scary, to say the least. Again, making also another comparison, Hamas is worse than ISIS. I agree, both groups are terrible. Comparing this to the Holocaust as well. Obviously some very strong comments coming from Prime Minister Netanyahu, making this not seem anywhere close to coming to some sort of end resolve. Next, we're going to get into the clip from President Biden. For those of you watching right now, though, please smash the like button to help get this out to more folks. We certainly can get more folks in here, and we would very much appreciate it. Let's go ahead and play this clip of Biden. It's about 3 minutes long, but I think it's worth listening to the whole thing. Obviously, the president's words here matter quite a bit, so I want you to see the full roughly 3 minutes of President Biden speaking with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
I want the people of Israel, the people of the world, to know where the United States stands. I've had my great Secretary of State here. He's been here for a lot, but I wanted to personally come and make that clear. Terrorist group Hamas has slaughtered, as has been pointed out, over 1,300 people. And there's not hyperbole to suggest slaughtered. And including 31 Americans as part of that. And they've taken scores of people hostage, including children. You said, imagine what those children hiding from Hamas were thinking. It's beyond my comprehension to be able to imagine what they're thinking. Beyond my comprehension. They're committed evils that and atrocities that make ISIS look somewhat more rational. Americans are grieving with you. They really are. And Americans are worried. Americans are worried because we know this is not an easy field to navigate, what you have to do. But the fact is that Israel, as they respond to these attacks, it seems to me that have to continue to ensure that you have what you need to defend yourselves. And we're going to make sure that occurs, as you know. And we have to also bear in mind that Hamas does not represent all the Palestinian people. And it has brought them only suffering. Years ago, I asked the Secretary of State when he and I were working in the Senate to write something for him, and he said, he wrote a line that I think is appropriate. He said, it's not, we lead, not just, well, I won't go into it, I'll wait later, taking too much time, but the point is this, that I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you. But there's a lot of people out there not sure. So we've got to overcome a lot of things. And it also means encouraging life-saving capacity to help the Palestinians who are innocent caught in the middle of this. And, well, at any rate, that's who we are. Not just me, but I mean, that's who the United States is. And it's just not the example of our power, it's the power of our example. It's almost as important. The world's looking. Israel has a value set like the United States does and other democracies. And they're looking to see what we're going to do.
All right. First, everyone do a little stretch and wake back up after that, because that's anyway, getting into the specifics of what he said in here, a couple points stood out to me. He's basically agreeing directly with Netanyahu, saying, Hamas makes ISIS look more rational, kind of giving Israel a little bit of leeway as far as like, it's okay if you make some mistakes, saying this isn't an easy field to navigate. Not sure exactly what he's referring to there, but maybe that it's okay if some mistakes are made and innocent lives are lost here. I don't know. He also made it clear that Israel needs to have what they need to defend themselves, and that the United States is going to make sure that they have that. We generally, I saw a statistic yesterday, we basically pay for about a fifth of Israel's defense budget during regular times. If the Republican members of the House ever decide to pick a Speaker of the House, I'm sure that will be subsidizing more than a fifth of it very soon. However, I don't see that debacle ending anytime soon. Definitely, though, and I will give him a teensy bit of credit. One person in here asked, was this after the hospital explosion? This was after the hospital explosion yesterday. The teensy bit of credit I will give him before I give him shit right afterwards is that he did say we need to, make sure that more innocent Palestinian lives aren't lost. He's not really following that up with any sort of action of any kind, but immediately then saying it looks like the hospital attack was from the other guys, referring to the hospital attack potentially coming from Hamas. We covered that hospital attack yesterday. I'm going to get into the specifics. Some specifics. The specifics are that there aren't specifics still, but it's really inconclusive at this point still who really led that attack, where the rocket did come from that hit the hospital yesterday. That has led to upwards of hundreds being killed. The range is kind of fluctuating. We'll call it in the fog of war at this point. But certainly, more comments from President Biden that are just hammering the point home that the United States is standing right in line with Israel here. No real condemnation of anything on that side of things. Nothing on the fact that, Israelis have shut off water and power to Gaza at this point. That is a big reason why there's a humanitarian crisis. Obviously, the water and power that they had before was iffy at best, but removing it entirely to a 5 by 25 mile stretch of land that is home to over 2 million people is obviously going to lead to issues. That shouldn't have happened at all. No comments from the president on that thus far. I also saw a note in here. Has he made it to East Palestine yet? He has not made it to East Palestine, but he's made it right next to Palestine on the other side of the world. But no time to go to East Palestine yet at this point. Although at this point, it ain't going to happen. We'll get into the specifics on the hospital here, though. There were a couple reports. I'm not going to show any clips or videos of this at this point because I've seen about 9 million people online in the last 24 hours post clips after, clip after clip after clip after photo. 9 out of 10 of them are saying, eventually being debunked. This is from 2020. This is from 2022. The moral of what has happened with the hospital yesterday is we still really don't know what has happened. Hamas and the Palestinian Authority are saying that the rocket attack came from the Israelis. The Israelis are saying the opposite. Both have a history of not telling the truth on things like this. So until we get some sort of real hard evidence, I'm not going to say one way or the other where it came from. President Biden essentially listened directly to what the Israelis are saying. I don't know. If they had more solid proof, I would like to see it, but we don't know. I just want to be clear about that. This is still going to be something that's going to be looked into, just like, especially in the early stages of the war in Ukraine and Russia, there were all sorts of issues there, as well as figuring out what is real, what is fake. The same goes here. With that, on this trip that President Biden took yesterday, I kind of outlined a couple of the risks that he's taking in making this trip, just from a political perspective. Obviously, he's probably initially thinking of going here to try to score a win. I don't know how you score a win out of this conflict. If that is the strategy that they're going for, it's already, before they even basically touched down in Tel Aviv, was a massive failure, because as I alluded to yesterday, several Arab leaders decided to pull their meetings with President Biden after word of that hospital strike got out. We're going to get into the specifics here in a second in an article from CNN. But for those of you watching right now, please smash the like button to help get this out to more folks. We've got a lot more still here coming on the Israel Palestine conflict going on, but we're also going to give an update on the UAW strike and the latest from what is going on there, over a month on strike with the UAW. But we can go ahead and pull up that article from CNN, the cancellation of meetings here. And I've got it here. Biden snubbed by Middle East allies as Arab world seethes over Gaza hospital blast. Some of the United States' closest Arab allies gave President Joe Biden the cold shoulder as he and his diplomats shuttled around the Middle East in an attempt to prevent the Israel-Hamas war from spiraling into a wider regional conflagration. Jordan, Egypt, and the Palestinian Authority canceled a planned meeting with Biden less than 24 hours before he was supposed to meet them for a four-way summit in the Jordanian capital, Amman, on Wednesday. The cancellation followed a massive blast in Gaza's Al-Ali Baptist Hospital that reportedly killed hundreds of Palestinians. Palestinian officials blamed Israel for the hospital blast, while Israeli officials said it was caused by a misfired Islamic Jihad rocket. Quote, "The summit won't be able to stop the war, which is what we want," Jordan's foreign minister Ayman Safadi, apologies for the name, told Al Jazeera early Wednesday, calling the hospital blast a war crime. "So we decided not to hold it," he said. Biden arrived in Tel Aviv on Wednesday, where he met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and members of the Israeli war cabinet. The president pledged continued backing of Israel and told Netanyahu that the hospital explosion, quote, "appears as though it was done by the other team, not you." The National Security Council said Wednesday that the government currently believes Israel is not responsible for the blast. CNN cannot independently verify what caused the explosion, nor the extent of the casualties. Arab leaders appeared to be alarmed at Washington's near complete support for Israel in the war and are trying to distance themselves from the Biden administration as anger grows on the Arab street against the Jewish state. At least 3,478 people have been killed in Gaza since the October 7th attack on Israel by Gaza's Hamas rulers, which killed at least 1,400 in the country. The article does go on here, but major point here being, though, that it sure seems like most of the neighboring Arab countries are not buying the story coming from Israel. They're not looking at the same information that the United States is looking at to essentially be pulling out of this. From their perspective, from whatever they're seeing, it's looking like this could have come from Israel. Again, we don't know. CNN says they don't know. We're gonna hold off on trying to figure it out. But major issue here is, if you want this thing to slow down, if you want this thing to come to an end, if you want a ceasefire, we're going to get into some protests that are going on in the United States actually calling for a ceasefire on this very issue. It's really not looking like one is coming anytime soon, unfortunately. This was a chance if you can get all these countries together and leaders together. Maybe they can work something out. But for President Biden he's probably en route flying across the other side of the world to go meet with these folks on this, and to cancel on the president of the United States is a big snub to President Biden. But it's a clear message that the neighboring countries are not on board with this at the moment. Let's look, though, at what has been going on here at home. We had hundreds of folks protesting today inside of the Cannon building that is attached to the U.S. Capitol. I believe we have a clip, Colin, if we can go ahead and pull that up. Is there a video with this? Yes, there is. We can go ahead and play that video just so that folks get an idea. Again, this is inside of the Cannon building. All the members of the House of Representatives, a lot of their offices are actually in this building. I just saw before we came on here on Twitter that Marjorie Taylor Greene was out there complaining. She was live streaming. Several members of Congress saw this going on in the building, again, where many of their offices are. And everybody is present right now because, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the Republicans are currently trying to still pick a Speaker of the House. They had one vote yesterday. Jim Jordan did not get there. Another one this morning. I think they're having another this afternoon. So that protest, again, was going on inside the Cannon building attached to the U.S. Capitol. That's where many members of Congress offices are. There are a handful of members of Congress who at this point have called for a ceasefire in Israel and Palestine at this point in time. Colin, we can go ahead and pull up the tweet. I believe it's from Corey Bush. This is the list of folks as of now who have called for a ceasefire. We've got Representative Tlaib, Carson, Summer Lee, Ramirez, Bowman, Watson Coleman, Jesus Garcia, Jonathan Jackson, Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, and Velasquez. I believe Congressman Greg Casar also added his name to that list today. I know he was getting flack for not being on it. He may be on that now. So it's mostly folks who are in the progressive caucus, if you will. Although the progressive caucus, it's not like they do anything with their numbers, but you can see at least some sort of statement coming from this group of 10 to 12 or so members of Congress here. With this protest going on at the same time today. And what's interesting about this too, and I found this just before we went live here, the U.S. actually had an opportunity, the UN had an opportunity to try to pass some sort of ceasefire action article, if you will. We actually, I believe I have a clip from Reuters here, Colin. We can go ahead and pull that up. To detail what was actually going to be in this vote that happened earlier this afternoon. We can go ahead and pull up that article if you've got it, Colin. And this vote was set for some sort of ceasefire action coming from the UN. Headline: UN Security Council to vote Wednesday on Israel-Gaza conflict. The United Nations Security Council will now vote on Wednesday on a Brazilian drafted resolution that calls for humanitarian pauses in the conflict between Israel and Palestinian militants, Hamas, to allow humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. The council is expected to discuss, at the request of the United Arab Emirates and Russia, a Gaza hospital blast that killed hundreds of people on Tuesday, diplomats said. Palestinian UN envoy Riyad Mansour blamed Israeli forces for the massacre at the hospital, calling for an immediate ceasefire. Israel's UN ambassador Gilead Erdan issued a statement accusing the Palestinian Islamic Jihad militant group of responsibility. Islamic Jihad has denied the allegations. Reuters could not independently verify who is not responsible for the blast. The 15-member council had initially been due to vote on Monday on the Brazilian draft, but it was postponed 24 hours to allow for more time to negotiate. The United States then pushed for a further delay as President Joe Biden visits Israel on Wednesday. It was unclear if the United States, a veto power who traditionally shields its ally Israel from any Security Council action, would allow the resolution to pass. The draft also urges Israel, without naming it, to rescind its order for Gaza civilians to move to the south of the Palestinian enclave. Surprise, surprise. Colin, we can just, surprise, surprise, though. That vote happened today, and there was one voting country that voted against it, preventing it from happening. I think you can guess who it is, but we'll go ahead and play the clip. You got a second here to guess right now. I'll keep an eye on the comments if you can guess the country that prevented this from passing. You got 5 seconds. 4. Let's see if you can guess the country that did it. All right, I'm seeing some answers, and some of them are right so far. So let's go ahead and play the clip, Colin, and see.
Those against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows: 12 votes in favor, 1 vote against, 2 abstentions. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council.
Now, I also want to be clear. So yes, for those of you who guessed correctly, although there was random an Uruguay guess, not sure where that one was coming from, but yes, the U.S. did vote against this. And to be totally clear, this wasn't calling for just a total ceasefire. This was calling essentially for gaps in fighting to allow for humanitarian aid to come in. This wasn't calling for like, yep, we're going to end it like right now. No more Israel Palestine conflict. No, this was a UN call to essentially have moments of pause in the fighting to allow for humanitarian aid to flow in and out of a border. Hopefully, at least through Egypt. The Israelis have not let anything go back and forth through the Palestinian border. So basically, looking at this right now, each day seems to have gotten to a point where we're a little bit further away from a deal. This trip has got to be looked at by the Biden administration as a bit of a failure at this point. I mean, you're losing that meeting with the other Arab countries. You do meet with Netanyahu still, but it's a very, if you're trying to negotiate some sort of peace here, I just really don't see that happening. If anything, it looks like, the United States has lost some credibility with these other countries in the area, which is, it's part of the game, I guess. But as far as having some sort of, end to the fighting, unfortunately, it's not looking like that's going to be the case. I wish the news was better than that. But at this point, it is not. We're going to continue to update folks on this, but again, I'm going to just add another layer of caution of just don't believe everything you see necessarily on the internet here. There is a lot of propaganda going around on all sides of this conflict. Even if you see a video of something, it could be a video of anything. You don't know the geography. Maybe you do, but most people don't know the geography of Palestine or Israel or whatever the heck is right there by just looking at a video. So, don't take everything with a grain of salt. Look at it again, see if other places are being able to verify it before you jump to conclusions that, hey, this was 100% this was 100% that. It's not a great way to look at things. So, with that being said, we are going to move on to an update on the UAW strike here in just a second. But please smash the like button for folks who are just joining us right now. Again, we've had a pretty big show so far today. We first spoke with Stephen Lester from the Center for Health and I keep butchering I apologize here. Stephen Lester from the Center of Health and Environmental Justice. We spoke with him about the lack of testing that has been credible in East Palestine and the ongoing health concerns, especially in regards to one of the most toxic chemicals in the world, dioxin, and the effects that is having on folks in East Palestine. Obviously, just did the update here on what's going on in Israel and Palestine. There it is. Gotta get that slip out of the way once. And now we're going to jump into the UAW. Also, I'll note, we'll read all super chats at the end. I see we've got one in here. You can also, again, we'll also shout out all new members. You can become a member either right here on YouTube, or you can go to statuscoup.com/join, especially to support our on-the-ground reporting. For those of you who don't know, we were on the ground for the first 25 days of the UAW strike. We had Jordan on the ground. We had Tina on the ground. We had Ron Placone on the ground. It was John Farina was there the whole time, the whole 25 days. So, if you want to support the kind of reporting that we do, please, statuscoup.com/join to do so. Moving on here now to the UAW strike. Investor Day has been pushed back at GM over this strike. Oh no, poor GM. Colin, we can go ahead and pull up the article here. GM pushes back Investor Day. I think this is, did I go out of order? It's the other article, I believe, Colin. Freep.com. There you go. Perfect. You got it. GM pushes back Investor Day due to the UAW strike and analysts say that they know what that means. General Motors is postponing its annual investor day next month to focus on reaching a new labor agreement with the United Auto Workers for GM's 48,000 UAW represented employees. But the automaker is expected to provide the financial impact it has incurred so far from the ongoing UAW strike against the Detroit Three when it reports third quarter earnings on October 24th. Each year, GM holds an investor day, typically in October or November, to lay out the financial forecast for investors and go over its business model, future products, revenue opportunities, and other key aspects of its business. Last year, for example, GM told investors it would make more money than expected and its electric vehicles would be profitable by 2025. This year's meeting was scheduled to take place on November 16th. GM spokesman Jim Kane confirmed to the Detroit Free Press that the automaker told investors last week that it would hold its investor day in the first part of next year, since our leadership team is currently focused on labor negotiations. Another GM spokesman, David Caldwell, added that the event is being rescheduled because, quote, our leadership team's focus right now is on securing a new labor agreement in the U.S., a sign that there's no end in sight for the UAW strike. The UAW went on strike on September 15th, targeting one plant at each of the Detroit Three. The UAW has since expanded strike targets to include 38 parts distribution centers owned by GM and Stellantis, and more assembly plants, including Ford's Kentucky truck plant in Louisville, where it builds the most profitable vehicles, the Ford F-Series Super Duty pickup, Ford Expedition, and Lincoln Navigator SUVs. There are about 34,000 UAW workers currently on strike. That article continues, but this strategy so far that has been used, as alluded at the end of this, has been not just a full-on strike at all facilities, but a stand-up strike, essentially targeting specific facilities one at a time, keeping the companies guessing, and using them in the negotiating tactics. They mentioned the Kentucky Ford plant the other day. Apparently, negotiations with Ford were moving somewhere, and then Ford ended up giving the United Auto Workers basically the same offer they had received 2 weeks prior. And in retaliation, the United Auto Workers, essentially said, you know what, we're going to shut down the Kentucky plant, have those workers go on strike until, we get a serious offer, but putting the ball in the court of the UAW to actually give a fair contract, or for them to essentially make the decision to see more of their plants close. So GM pushing that investor day back to focus on these negotiations. It seems like they probably could have been focusing on them a lot more. The demands are pretty clear at this point of what folks are looking for, but we'll ultimately see. We also have Stellantis at this point pulling out of a big event coming up. We can go ahead and pull up that article. UAW Strike Day 33. This is UAW Strike Day 33. Stellantis pulls out of CES 2024, cites walkout. Stellantis NV on Tuesday said it's canceling its plans for a display and presentation at the CES Technology Expo in January in Las Vegas, citing the costs of the United Auto Workers strike. The UAW's unprecedented simultaneous strike against the Detroit Three automakers marked its 33rd day, with about 34,000 workers on strike at General Motors Company, Ford Motor Company, and Stellantis. An analysis from East Lansing Consulting Anderson Economic Group estimates the first 4 weeks has resulted in total economic losses of $7.7 billion, including $3.45 billion at the Detroit Three. Stellantis, in a news release, said the move to skip CES is about preserving business fundamentals as it executes comprehensive countermeasures to mitigate financial impacts and preserve capital. There's a bunch of very corporate mumbo jumbo there. It wasn't immediately clear what Stellantis had planned to show at CES, the world's largest technology show. This year, during a keynote presentation, it revealed the futuristic all-electric Ram 1500 Revolution concept, the vision for the future of its production electric truck, the Ram 1500 REV that debuted in April. An inquiry was left with Stellantis representatives about its plans for the Los Angeles Auto Show, scheduled for the 17th to the 26th. Tim Kuniskis previously said the brand expected to reveal a refreshed Ram 1500 truck for 2024 and the company's first all-electric vehicle built in North America. The Ram ProMaster set to launch before the end of the year in Saltillo, Mexico. It'll be interesting to see. That article continues, but next week GM and Ford will be releasing their earnings. So it'll be kind of the first time to see the impact of the financial impact that these strikes have had on the company at this point in time. But really, I mean, if the companies managed their money well, when you look at it, they have been making more money, especially when you look at things over the last 10, 20 years than they ever have before. Their executive pay is going up, basically up and to the right, continuous. But their worker pay, as we've covered, as we've heard from more than dozens of UAW workers through all of our on-the-ground coverage. Again, we were on the ground the first 25 days or so of the strike, is that their wages are not going up. That temporary workers, are being used for 1, 2, 3 years at a time and are stuck essentially at $17 an hour. Maybe in some cases it might have been 15 even. But the companies, as we'll see in this next article, they're doing fine financially, and they can afford to meet these demands, or at least bargain in good faith. We can go ahead and pull up this last article here in this section, Colin. The UAW focuses on soaring CEO pay in strike for better wages at the Detroit 3. The UAW strike against the Detroit 3 for higher wages, more paid time off, the elimination of tiered workers. That's the kind of temp workers I'm talking about, which in its fourth week has drawn attention to vast differences in pay between auto workers and executives at auto manufacturers. The union has frequently spoken out about the gulf between CEO pay and worker pay to argue that the auto manufacturers can afford to increase wages for auto workers. They're absolutely rolling in the money. They're competing for who gets the biggest executive compensation package, said Sean Fain, president of the UAW, in a YouTube video about CEO compensation uploaded last week. In 2022, all three CEOs made above $20 million. General Motors CEO Mary Barra's compensation is $29 million, the highest of the big three, followed by Stellantis' Carlo Tavares, about $25 million, and Ford's Jim Farley at $21 million. What's behind the UAW's argument for higher pay? Fain has also pointed to the 6% pay increases auto workers received since their 2019 contract, compared to the 40% rise in automaker CEO pay, to make his argument for the union's pay demands. Cindy Shipani, professor of business administration and professor of business law at the University of Michigan, told States Newsroom over email that this 40% rise in CEO pay in the auto sector in the last 4 years has set up an opportunity for the UAW to call out a lack of fairness as they negotiate. The union seems to be arguing an equity issue, especially in light of the sacrifices the workers needed to make in past negotiations. She said, "Okay, of course, the CEO's job isn't comparable to the job of an average worker, but I suspect the UAW may believe it has some leverage. If the company can afford to raise the salary of a top executive at roughly 40% over 4 years, why not also grant the rank and file similar increases?" Auto workers who are responsible for motor vehicles and parts manufacturing received an average hourly pay of $28 an hour in September, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. But auto worker pay can vary a lot between different tiers of auto workers. That's a big sticking point here. Some auto workers are temporary or supplemental workers, even if they have worked at a plant for many years, and receive a lot less pay. The UAW wants to end that tiered system. This article continues to go on. It was actually a pretty good read if you want to check it out. Worth seeing the whole thing. But again, it's a easy decision for them to spend the money on their executives. Easy decision to essentially try to just hire more temporary workers, temporary in quotes, who you can pay for less money. Folks, in some cases, maybe struggle and need a job. They'll take that lower wage at first, but then all of a sudden they're doing the same work as somebody else who's getting paid $15 an hour more than they are, getting better benefits. That system is not fair. That's another sticking point that this summer, when we saw the UPS strike almost happen, they ended up successfully negotiating that contract, but that was an issue there too. You had a tiered system where folks who would be doing essentially the same job getting compensated very differently. That we're going to continue to stay on the UAW strike as well. Again, we spent 25 days on the ground there. And tomorrow you're actually going to get to hear from one of the guys who was there for part of it, because tomorrow evening you're going to have Ron Placone hosting the show here at 5 p.m. Eastern time. Yeah, I mean, if you got questions for Ron about it, make sure you leave them in the super chats because he will read those tomorrow. Overall, though, there's a lot to talk about there. I'm a little out of breath, if I'm being honest. The state of things right now is not great. At home and abroad, it's scary to see what's been going on in the world, especially in the last 2 weeks. It feels like so much has happened. And to put icing on the cake, even if we wanted to try to do something about it, we don't have a Speaker of the House, so we can't really pass any legislation at all. Yesterday, like I mentioned, there was the first vote. This morning there was a second vote, and Jim Jordan, yesterday it was 20 votes he missed. Today it was 22 votes, Republican votes he missed. He can only miss 5. I believe they might even be doing another round right now, which is it's been an interesting thing. I'm going to get to a couple here. I think we had just a couple of members join today. So we had two members. There might be 3. So first off, thank you so much. New member Janice. Janice, thank you so much for becoming a new member. And then new yearly member, Joy. Joy, thanks so much signing up for the full year. We really, really appreciate that. Again, thank you so much, Janice and Joy, for becoming new members. And then we also had a comment from a member. He's been a member for 2 months, Tyler Hackner. We see him in the chat all the time. Love the work you all do. Thank you so much, Tyler, for that comment. And thank you for being a member. We really appreciate that. I saw that one come in. That was coming in during the while we were speaking with Stephen Lester at the beginning of the show here. Again, big day, lots of news to go over. But I'm sure there's going to be even more tomorrow, and you can bet that Ron Placone will be here to go through all of it with you all. Friday, you're also going to have Tina Desiree Berg on for her Friday show as usual. Jordan's got another week or 2 to wrap up his book. Again, for those of you who don't know, he landed the book deal on Flint. He's got to get that all wrapped up by the end of this month. So you're going to be seeing, again, a decent amount of myself, Ron, Tina, like you have been. Like I said, you had me today. Tomorrow, you got Ron Placone. Friday, you got Tina. And I'll actually be back in on Monday as well. All of that being said, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your evening.